It's been an incredible Sunday with incredible women, and what if I told you we're still just getting started? Before I introduce our next two speakers, think about one of your favorite series these days, Never Have I Ever. Think about Priyanka Chopra and the waves she's making. Do you know the story behind that story? There's a lot to unpack with our next two speakers today. They're women I would describe as conquerors of the culture wars. They are women who are fighting about and for representation, both in Hollywood and in Silicon Valley. And they're women who are opinionated, independent, and not afraid to punt on themselves. It gives me great pleasure to welcome at the Global Townhall today from New York, Anjula Acharia. Anjula is an angel investor, an entrepreneur, and a philanthropist, and a businesswoman, and also a celebrity creator, the moving spirit behind Priyanka Chopra's global embrace. And we're also joined by Poorna Jagannathan. You have seen her in multiple roles on your screen, most recently in the series hit, that breakout hit, Never Have I Ever. Welcome, both of you. And I'm calling this conversation Brown Girl Rising because really I think at the heart of the story for both of you is a fight to see more women like yourselves on screen, more women like yourselves lead businesses, and also more women like yourselves be at the steering wheel. So it's a great pleasure to have both of you with us. Let me start with you, Anjula. You know, you've made the point that you invest in women, not merely from some abstract ideology, but because it makes absolute business sense. The investments you've made, for example, in Bumble, and then you exited, that didn't just come from some sort of space thinking, oh, let me just, encourage a sort of women-centric dating app. It's because it made pure business sense to you. Talk a little bit about how, from the racism you experienced growing up in England, where you spent a lot of time, to this moment where you're seen as someone who is dominating the public imagination, both in Hollywood and Silicon Valley. Talk about that arc, Anjula.
Sure. Well, firstly, thank you for having me, Barkha, here. I think it's amazing that you're doing this global town hall and bringing voices from New York to Hollywood to Mumbai to all over the world. So firstly, just kudos to you for taking the initiative to do this and bring these voices together because it's meaningful. Yes, it's interesting whether it's Hollywood and entertainment or whether it's startups and investing in women. I always say one thing: talent and numbers don't lie. So, ultimately, I think that if you're, actually, Purna and I were just talking about, working with Mindy Kaling. So Priyanka and I have been working with Mindy Kaling on a movie that we sold to Universal. And when we went in and sold that movie to Universal, we really went off the heels of Crazy Rich Asians, which had done, I think, around 230 million at the box office at that point. And it was great timing to talk about how something that most people would perceive as niche could become mainstream and make real money at the box office. And it's the same with startups, like, Whitney Wolf Herd, who founded Bumble, exited that for billions of dollars. Payal Kadakia, who founded ClassPass, exited that for billions of dollars. Like, ultimately, I think that what we've got to get better at doing as women, as South Asia's women, as women who are minorities, is telling a story of metrics and money, because that's ultimately what people care about. And that's ultimately what's going to move us forward. And I think for a long time, we've told stories of passion and, of creativity and things like that. And that's so important. And of course that matters. But ultimately, when you're trying to succeed in business and you're talking to people that don't look like us, we have to tell a story of revenue and metrics. So, I think I learned that pretty early on when I was in England growing up and experienced an awful lot of racism. What I really wanted to do was be an actress and basically do Shakespeare plays for the rest of my life. That's what I wanted to do. But I knew there weren't any roles for someone that looked like me. And I made a decision that I was either going to be a poor actress or I was going to be a rich businesswoman, and I had to understand the fundamentals of business. So I learned the fundamentals of business and decided to be a businesswoman and try and make money that way because I didn't want to be a poor actress. But I don't know if that answers your question, but hopefully that does.
No, but I was going to say that now you're such a rich businesswoman that you can do those Shakespeare plays, and nobody could stop you. They'd put their money on it.
Not that rich. Getting there.
Not that rich. Getting there. But it's so refreshing to hear that money and power, and those are metrics that matter. But it's sad that that's what it takes to basically, in a sense, transcend the invisibilization of, as you said, people who look like you and people who look like Purna. People say it's changing. Is it really? Let me take that to Purna. I mean, Never Have I Ever is a global success. It's a global rage. People have applauded it for, in a sense, going beyond the stereotype. And I think one sentence that you said in an interview really stayed with me, that it's not that stereotypes are false, it's that stereotypes are incomplete. And that's the problem with stereotypes. Purna, you're a deeply fiercely political person. Representation matters to you. And when I heard Anjula say, I couldn't get roles for somebody who looked like me, you've probably had to battle that pretty much through your career, maybe up until now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we're seeing now is a very particular, again, Angela and I were just talking about this. It's a very particular time in history where all of a sudden it seems like all of us are so visible and our careers are, just catapulting forward. But, the seeds of this movement that you're seeing today, and not even 3 years ago, like right now, the seeds of this movement were planted many, many years ago. So I think Mindy Kaling, Ava DuVernay, Shonda Rhimes, Oprah, all these women of color creating this movement for women of color. We are really stepping into this particular time. So I am a recipient of a lot of hard work, a lot of belief in creating something that didn't exist just even a decade ago for many of us. So I've been an actor for 15 years now, and I'm always struck by the quiet that happens now versus the quiet that happened, 10 years ago. When I didn't get roles 10 years ago, I felt like there was nothing, that my career was over and there was nothing that was going to come to me anymore. It was the end. And now when there's quiet, I have such a belief that the movement will carry me forward, that these women, like Anjula, who just laid so much groundwork, will ensure that people like me and people who are coming after me will have careers that we thrive in, and that we see more people that look like us in, for sure.
Yeah. Can I ask you, before I take this back to Anjula, like you said that at one point you thought your career was over, nothing meaningful was ever going to come your way. At that point, did you feel invisible? Did you feel overlooked? Did you feel patronized? What was the attitude? Was there complete invisibilization, or was it more like marginalization?
No, it was. That's a really great question. And it was never over. It was just that I stopped taking roles that were not meaningful to me anymore, and there was always those roles, the doctors and the nurses and, the subsidiary of the subsidiary roles available to me. But because I came into acting so late, I had and our careers are so brief. Or, that was a thought that I held before, and that's changing. But I just felt like unless I was doing work that was meaningful for me, and by meaningful, I mean work where I could show up completely as a complete human being, work there where I could talk about subjects that were important to me. I don't know if you know, but my family is riddled with stories of addiction and depression and sexual violence. And that's not only my nuclear family, it reverberates throughout generations. And how come I'm doing roles that have nothing of that complexity? Why am I showing up to do roles where I have to leave my entire self behind when I walk in? And that's really the shift of Never Have I Ever. One of the biggest things is when I walk through the door of the set, I bring my complete self to set, and that's such a unique gift.
Yeah. And you've spoken very honestly about the fact that in your own life, there is this, big family with its flaws, and how those complete people are never actually personified on the screen, or weren't till this point. Anjula, before I get to, how you came with this proposal to globalize Priyanka Chopra, I want to ask you about your years in England. I have read multiple conversations that you have given other journalists where you've spoken about how you couldn't relate to mass culture. You didn't see any shades of yourself in the popular culture around you. You've alluded to the racism that engulfed you. What are your memories of those years when you were at the receiving end of that racism?
Yeah, it's so painful, Barkha. I mean, from a very young age, from really just starting school, I grew up in a completely white suburb in England. There was literally no families of color but one, and I mean, it was incredibly painful. I was bullied every single day. I was, treated inferior. I spoke at Parliament the other day, and I talked about how kids were so scared to hold my hand because they thought my color was going to come off, that the teacher would tell them to hold my sleeve. The teachers told me that, Indians were, I mean, they didn't even call us Indians then. They called us Pakis. Like, they were like, Pakis are only good to run corner stores. Like, it was, kids were so mean to me. It was horrible. It was just really, really horrible. And then there was the rising of the National Front, which is, the precursor for neo-Nazis. So it was very difficult. I mean, I think growing up in London for South Asians would have been very different. I didn't grow up in London, so I just didn't have access to anyone of color. But what was very interesting to me, which was an observation I made very young, was I remember one day, there were 4 channels then, and I went home one day and there was this show that all the kids watched called Grange Hill. And I went home and everyone would watch Grange Hill, and they suddenly had this Indian family, Pakistani family come on, and I was dreading it. I was like, oh my God, what's this Pakistani family going to be like? Of course, the father owned the corner shop in this neighborhood that Grange Hill was set, and there was a daughter, and the daughter had to be a virgin, and the father saw the daughter in this show walking down the street with this white boy and decided to drag the daughter home and take her to the doctors to check that she was still a virgin. And true story. And the next day at school, I was bullied so hard. Like, the kids were like, is that what your dad does to you? Like, you've got to be a virgin. Like, people bullied me so hard, literally every corner of the school. I ran away from school that day because I didn't want to be there. It was so horrible. And I remember coming home and thinking, I hate that show. I'm never going to watch it again. And how dare they do that to me? Like, I just remember thinking, that show was responsible for the day that I had at school, which was so bad. And years later, I was just like, I have to change this. Like, the way we are represented in Western media, in any media, really, for young kids, I mean, sorry, it makes me very emotional. It's hard to talk about, but it's like how people decide to treat you based on what they see on television, these gross stereotypes, these horrible images of us. But by the way, not even written by us, like, not created by us, not written by us, and written by people that are not us, and decide our fates in many ways. So it was really challenging.
What's really important about what you're saying, and I know it's painful to recount, is that culture has real consequences. It's like people say, what you say on social media, doesn't it spill over? It spills over. If there's hate online, it inevitably spills over offline. And what happened with you, that racism, that stereotyping on screen, had real consequences. And that should teach us to never see this as entertainment, but actually something that shapes us, forms us, and forms our society and the reality around us. And Anjula, going from there to being the person who comes to India to convince Priyanka Chopra to go global, I mean, that is an incredible arc.
Yeah. The crazy thing about the situation with Priyanka was I to be honest, I don't watch very much Indian content, like Hindi movie content. I would go back to England. I was living in America. I would go back to England. My parents consume it. And randomly, I just saw Priyanka on TV. I wasn't even in the business at that point. I was literally just working in venture capital in Silicon Valley, investing in companies. I had nothing to do with the business. And I don't know what it was. I saw her on television and I asked my mom who she was. And my mom was like, oh, that's Priyanka Chopra. And she's like this huge star in India. And in my head, something just twigged. And it's so funny when people say to me, why do you invest in that founder? Or why do you, I mean, same with Lady Gaga. I met Lady Gaga before anybody even knew who she was. And I told Jimmy Iovine, who ran Interscope Records, that she'd be the next Madonna. It was just this twig that I had in my head, And with Priyanka, she was already famous, obviously, but not known in the West. And I didn't know who she was at that point. But there was just something about her that I was just like, if anyone could make that move from India to America, and, we'd willed for it. Like we'd seen Aishwarya Rai try, like we'd willed for people to do it. So when I saw her, I just had this vision that she could do it. And so anyway, I forgot about it. And 6 years later, when I'm sitting with Jimmy Iovine, who was the founder of Interscope Records and Beats by Dre, and we'd just done all the music for Slumdog Millionaire. It'd been top 10 in 10 countries. We'd collaborated Pussycat Dolls with A.R. Rahman. And Jimmy was like, what do you want to do? Like, what's the next project you want to do? And I will back you. And I was just like, oh, there's this woman, Priyanka Chopra. I was going to say Jonas then, but she was Priyanka Chopra then.
Yeah.
And he just was a dream come true ticket. He said, go and get her. So yeah. I got on a plane and I went to get her and tried to convince her. And it took a long time.
Well, it's amazing and it's a great sort of success story, but it's also kind of a vindication, I think, for you for that awful television show that you watched that had real consequences for you the next day. Purna, Nirbhaya, considered one of your best works, came from a deep place within. We're talking, of course, about the gang rape of Jyoti Singh. I name her with the permission of her mother, but it says something about sexual violence and how we look at it that we don't name the victim, in this case, the victim and not the survivor because she was killed. And you then spoke about how you felt your own silence in the past with everything you had experienced personally, and you felt you should have spoken. And I think so many of us carry that almost guilt of our own silence.
Yeah. It was kind of. I think everyone has their road to Damascus moment in their lifetime, and I think that was definitely mine. It was this, when. And Barkha, I still remember your reporting from that time, which was so it just really carried us forward into the next phase. But it was the insight that my silence around sexual violence made me complicit around what had happened on that bus that night. That our silences create the fabric by which sexual violence can continue. And so the insight was, well, if I break my silence, what will it do to sexual violence? Will it start unraveling, and will it perhaps put an end to sexual violence? If we shift the shame from the survivor onto the perpetrator, where it rightly belongs, what will happen in that equation? So that was what Yael Farber, who directed the play, really set out to do. And as you know, it has 5 women, including me, on stage who share their real stories of sexual violence and gender-based violence and survival. And, every night, I mean, especially in India, which was, we opened to 1,000-seat theater, and it was on Holi a couple of years ago. And every night in every country around the world, in every city, there would be hundreds of people who got up from their seat and broke their silence a lot of time for the first time in their own lives. And so it was, what looking back, it was the beginning of the Me Too movement, the power of the Me Too movement. If you speak your own truth, if you, and I often say Nirbhaya is not watched, it's witnessed. When you witness someone coming forward and telling you their truth, you are called to, you're called into action. You're called into, you're called into taking accountability for what happened. You know, the other person's story becomes somehow through osmosis your story, and you're called into action to do something. So that was really the power of Nirbhaya. I feel around the world, it began conversations on.
Yeah. And thank you for speaking to that moment with such a powerful sort of work of art. And again, this conversation reminds us again and again of the importance of culture and art and the deeply sort of political messaging at its center in the deepest way. I don't mean in terms of electoral politics. Anjula, let me give you the last word here. What next for you? I mean, Purna has, in a sense, confined her battle to one dimension of these culture wars. You're fighting twin battles. You're fighting Hollywood and Silicon Valley.
People keep asking me this question. I don't have a good answer for it. I don't know. My career has really been built off of just like witnessing my life and watching opportunities emerge and just jumping on them when I see them. So it's never been, I'm sorry to disappoint anyone that thinks this. I've never had a plan. I've never had like, oh, here's a plan and here's a goal and here's how I'm going to get to it. Never had that. It's always been I see this opportunity and I see this opportunity and I see this happening over here and I see culture shifting and I see an opportunity and I just jump on whatever I see that's happening at the time. So I really don't know what the next thing is for me. I think I'll know it when I see it, kind of thing. So I'm sorry, that's so disappointing.
No, it's not disappointing. It actually brings home the power of instinct. And I think you've said plenty of times that you've always acted on instinct. So now I need to end with a question we've asked all of our speakers today. I'll start with you, Purna. What would you tell your 16-year-old self?
Is that every decision you make counts for a larger picture. So keep making them. Keep sticking to it. Just keep being full of integrity and follow your instinct. Wow, that's really bizarre advice, but I'd probably say that.
Anjula?
I would say don't stop. I would literally say just don't stop. It'll happen at some point.
You're both actually saying the same thing, keep going. And, when we keep going, it bothers a lot of misogynists, just that we keep going and we never give up.
Yeah.
Well, thank you to both of you. You have, in your own spaces, challenged the arrangement and the structures of power, because let's not kid ourselves, it is about power, what both of you are doing, and you've upended stereotypes. And in speaking for yourselves and in your own success, you have not just inspired others, but made space for other women who will follow. And that's what's truly incredible, beyond your own personal success stories. Anjula Acharia, Poorna Jagannathan, it is a pleasure having you at We the Women, this Global Town Hall this evening. Thank you so much.